from most chilling thing you've ever said with a smile. Part 2. After Monica stormed out of the office, I sat back in my chair for a moment, letting the tension in the room settle. Ethan and Sophia were still frozen, staring at me as if they had just seen a ghost. Aunt Margaret dabbed at her eyes again, but gave me a faint, approving smile. I placed the trust documents carefully on the desk and finally exhaled. This was it. The real work had begun. Dad's company wasn't just a business. It was his life's work. Every late night, every risk he had taken, every relationship he had built, it all had to be protected. Monica might have thought she would walk away with it all, but she hadn't counted on the trust. The next morning, I went to the warehouse. Dust hung thick in the air, the office computers were outdated, and the delivery trucks were in desperate need of maintenance. But as I walked the floors, I could see the potential. Dad had built a system that could thrive again with the right leadership. I started with basics, organizing invoices, updating employee records, checking contracts, and quietly talking to the staff. Rumors had spread that Monica would liquidate the company, and fear had settled in. I promised them stability and respect. Slowly, morale began to rise. Monica, however, had no intention of giving up. She began calling Mr. Harris multiple times a day, hiring lawyers, and demanding access to company files. I ignored most of her messages. Letting her rage burn without giving her a reaction was part of the plan. Ethan, meanwhile, was distracted by the cars Dad had left him. One by one, he drove off in the vintage collection, grinning ear to ear. Sophia quietly stayed by my side, helping me go through Dad's personal files, his notes, and letters. That's when I discovered something incredible. Dad had left detailed plans for business expansion, notes on partnerships, and even strategies for surviving tough market conditions. It was like he had predicted everything and had entrusted me to carry it forward. Then, one afternoon, Monica showed up at the warehouse, designer heels clicking, phone in hand, and a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't do this without me," she said, her voice tight with rage. I gestured calmly to the trust documents on my desk. "I already am," I said. "Legally, I'm the trustee. Everything Dad put in the trust is under my management." Her face twisted in disbelief and then fury. "You stole everything. This was supposed to be mine," she shouted. "You thought that," I said evenly, "but Dad wanted someone who would care for his legacy, not just his assets." She stormed out again, slamming the door. For the first time, I felt a wave of vindication, but I knew the battle was far from over. Over the next few weeks, I focused entirely on the company. I reopened old contracts, secured new clients, and began hiring young, talented employees Dad had mentored. Slowly but surely, the company started to stabilize. Monica's constant interference only seemed to strengthen my resolve. The lake house was next. Monica had tried to quietly put it on the market, but the trust prevented her from doing so. I drove up one Friday afternoon, standing at the edge of the lake. The water reflected the autumn sky, calm and golden. This was Dad's sanctuary, the place where he had gone to escape the chaos of work. I felt his presence there, reminding me to protect it. That weekend, I invited Ethan and Sophia. Together, we cleared out decades of accumulated junk, restored the rooms, and even repaired the old dock. It felt like bringing Dad back, piece by piece. The lake house, once a symbol of loss and uncertainty, now felt like home again. Monica didn't stay quiet. She attempted to intimidate business partners, spreading false rumors that I was inexperienced and reckless. But I remained calm and strategic. I presented financial statements, growth projections, and employee testimonials to the board. Her influence crumbled silently in front of the very people she hoped to sway. By the end of the year, the company was growing again, profits were rising, and the employees were loyal and motivated. Monica, finally defeated, retreated from the business entirely. Ethan admitted he was impressed, and Sophia gave me a rare, genuine smile. Aunt Margaret quietly pulled me aside, whispering, "Your father would be so proud. You didn't just inherit the business, you became it." Sitting alone that night on the dock, the lake calm beneath the moonlight, I reflected on everything. Greed, betrayal, secrecy. They had all been present at the start, but patience, planning, and love for family had won. I held Dad's old business card in my hand and whispered, "I won't let you down." For the first time since Dad's passing, I smiled. Not in triumph, but because the truth and the legacy had finally won. The weeks after reclaiming control of the company and securing the lake house were both exhausting and exhilarating. Monica had retreated, at least temporarily, but I knew better than to assume she was finished. Greed like hers never simply walked away. It plotted quietly, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan had become increasingly invested in the business side of things, not just the cars. At first, he had only cared about his vintage collection, but seeing me handle contracts, clients, and logistics with careful precision seemed to spark something in him. Sophia, on the other hand, quietly surprised me with her sharp instincts for marketing and client relations. Together, we formed a small but capable leadership team, blending Dad's legacy with our own ideas. Monica's attacks became more subtle and cunning. She began sending threatening letters to business partners, attempting to shake confidence in the company. She even tried to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on the business and me personally, but I was always one step ahead. I reviewed every contract, double-checked the company's finances, and ensured all communications with clients were transparent. Every one of her attempts backfired, and slowly, word got back to her that her strategies weren't working. One afternoon, Ethan and I were in the warehouse inspecting the vintage car collection when Sophia called from the lake house. "You two need to see this," she said urgently. We arrived to find Aunt Margaret already there, a worried frown on her face. Monica had shown up unannounced, this time with her lawyer in tow, demanding immediate access to the business records and threatening legal action. I calmly met them at the door. "Everything Dad put in the trust is under my management. Legally, you have no claim beyond what the trust specifies," I said, keeping my voice measured. Monica's face turned red, a mix of fury and disbelief. "You can't keep me out forever. This isn't over," she snapped. "It's over the moment Dad made his decision," I replied, "and it won't change because you're angry." Her lawyer tried to argue, but Mr. Harris, ever professional, stood firmly by my side. "The trust is legally binding," he said. "All assets, including the lake house and the company, are to be managed by the trustee, Edward's son. The court would uphold this document without question." Frustrated and humiliated, Monica left, muttering threats under her breath. The moment she was gone, Ethan let out a low whistle. "She's really persistent," he said. "She always has been," I replied. "But persistence without strategy accomplishes nothing." Over the next few months, we expanded the company's operations, slowly rebuilding Dad's vision. Sophia's marketing campaigns attracted new clients, while Ethan's management of the logistics team improved efficiency dramatically. I focused on high-level strategy, long-term planning, and keeping Monica's interference from affecting our momentum. During this time, the lake house became a sanctuary for all of us. Evenings were spent by the dock, sharing memories of Dad, and occasionally laughing about childhood antics none of us had dared mention in years. These moments reminded me why Dad had fought so hard to build this life. Not for money, not for status, but for the family he loved. Then came the twist we hadn't anticipated. One morning, a courier arrived with a letter addressed to me from Monica. She had tried one last move, a legal challenge claiming some technicality in the trust document could void my control over the company. I read the letter quietly, then called Mr. Harris immediately. After reviewing it, he reassured me, "There's absolutely nothing in this that affects your control. The trust is airtight, and the courts would rule in your favor immediately if it escalated." I placed the letter in the drawer and exhaled. Monica had spent months trying to undermine me, but patience, planning, and staying true to Dad's intentions had kept everything intact. Ethan and Sophia noticed a change in me. I wasn't just running the business. I was leading a legacy, and together, we were stronger than ever. Aunt Margaret often stayed at the lake house for the weekends, providing both guidance and a comforting presence. As the year drew to a close, the company posted record profits. Employee morale had never been higher, and Monica's presence had all but disappeared from the business landscape. Sitting on the dock one evening, watching the lake shimmer under the sunset, I finally allowed myself a moment of peace. Dad's trust, his vision, and the lessons he had left behind were alive in me. I whispered softly into the wind, "We did it, Dad. We're carrying your dream forward, exactly like you wanted." And in that quiet moment, I smiled, not in triumph, but in deep, satisfying understanding. This wasn't just about winning against Monica or securing a business. It was about honoring a man who had trusted me enough to continue his legacy, no matter what. The months that followed felt like a whirlwind. The company was growing steadily. The lake house had become our personal sanctuary, and the sense of accomplishment was intoxicating. But I knew Monica was not finished. A woman like her didn't walk away quietly. She planned, schemed, and waited for the perfect opening. One Monday morning, I arrived at the warehouse to find a stack of letters from Monica's legal team. Threats, insinuations, and attempts to discredit me filled every envelope. I calmly handed them to Mr. Harris, who shook his head with a faint smile. "She's running out of options," he said. "Nothing here has any weight against the trust." Ethan, curious as ever, leaned over my shoulder. "She's relentless. How did Dad deal with someone like this?" I smiled faintly. "He didn't just deal with it. He prepared for it. That's why the trust exists. That's why he trusted me with everything." Sophia had taken on a bigger role in the company, leading marketing campaigns and client relations. Her ideas were fresh, creative, and exactly what the company needed to thrive in a modern market. Watching her grow into this role reminded me of why Dad had always believed in us, even when we doubted ourselves. Then came a surprising turn. Monica decided to target one of our largest clients, attempting to pull them away with promises and threats. I knew confrontation alone wouldn't work this time. It required strategy. I scheduled a meeting with a client and walked them through our achievements, the improvements in efficiency, and the new projects in development. I also highlighted the stability and loyalty of our employees, something Monica could never replicate. By the end of the meeting, the client was not only reassured, but more committed than ever. Monica's attempt had failed spectacularly. Ethan clapped me on the shoulder afterward. "You handled that like Dad would have," he said. Sophia smiled quietly, her confidence growing with each victory. luxury. Meanwhile, the lake house had become more than just a retreat. It was a hub for planning and family bonding. We spent evenings there, working on strategies for expanding the business while sharing memories of Dad. Aunt Margaret often joined us, offering wisdom, encouragement, and sometimes even a gentle reprimand when Monica's name came up too many times. But Monica's persistence reached a new level. She tried to influence the press, planting stories about potential financial mismanagement and questioning my competence. I knew that responding publicly would only give her more attention, so I focused on transparency internally. Employees were kept informed, clients were updated, and every move was documented. Slowly, Monica's tactics began to backfire. The press, realizing the truth, started publishing corrections, highlighting our successes instead of her accusations. One particularly intense evening, Monica showed up at the warehouse unexpectedly, accompanied by her lawyer and a small entourage. She demanded access to company records, threatening legal action once again. I met her calmly in the office. "Everything Dad placed in trust is under my control," I said. "Legally, there is nothing you can do to change that." Her face twisted in fury. "You think this is the end? I will not be humiliated like this." "You already are," I said softly. "And it's only because Dad trusted me to do the right thing." She left again, storming out with her lawyer trailing behind, muttering under her breath. This time, however, I felt quiet satisfaction. Every attack she launched only reinforced the importance of patience, strategy, and family unity. Over the next few months, the company continued to expand. Ethan managed logistics with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Sophia revolutionized client relations and marketing, and I oversaw high-level strategy, partnership, and growth initiatives. Monica's influence waned with every victory we achieved. One evening, sitting on the dock with Sophia and Ethan, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something profound. This was Dad's legacy, yes, but it was also ours now. We weren't just preserving his work. We were building on it, making it stronger, smarter, and more resilient than he ever could have alone. Aunt Margaret joined us with a cup of tea, smiling at our quiet contentment. "Your father would be proud," she said. "He trusted you with everything, and you've proven him right." The lake shimmered in the last rays of sunlight, and for the first time in months, the weight of Monica's schemes felt distant. Dad had prepared me for every challenge, but it was our family, our unity, and our dedication that had truly made his vision come alive. Sitting there, I whispered softly to the water, "We did it, Dad. We're not just keeping your dream alive, we're growing it." And in that quiet golden evening, I finally smiled, not out of triumph, but because the legacy was safe and the family was stronger than ever. By the time the next quarter arrived, the company was thriving. Contracts were secured, profits were up, and employees were motivated in ways I hadn't even imagined. Ethan had fully embraced his role managing the logistics and vintage car operations, while Sophia's marketing campaigns had attracted clients from across the country. Aunt Margaret often visited, providing guidance and keeping us grounded. But one thing was clear: Monica's shadow still lingered. Then came the day that would mark the final showdown. I received an urgent call from Mr. Harris. "Monica's escalated her legal tactics. She's attempting to file a court injunction claiming some irregularities in the trust." I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. "Has she actually found anything?" "Nothing substantial," Mr. Harris said, "but she's aggressive, and this could drag out if we don't act quickly." I knew that direct confrontation was unavoidable, but this time, I would not react with anger or fear. I had Dad's plan, the trust was airtight, and our family was stronger than ever. Ethan and Sophia joined me at the office that evening as we prepared for the inevitable court hearing. "Whatever happens, we stick to facts and evidence," I said. "No theatrics, no letting her manipulate anyone." The day of the hearing arrived. Monica walked in with her lawyer, dressed impeccably, her confidence radiating, but there was a hint of desperation in her eyes. I remained calm, my siblings by my side, and Mr. Harris by my counsel. The judge reviewed the documents, listened to the arguments, and scrutinized every claim Monica made. It quickly became clear that there was nothing to challenge. Dad's trust was meticulously prepared, legally binding, and unassailable. Monica's lawyer struggled, flipping through papers and making feeble arguments, but the truth was undeniable. When the verdict was announced, Monica's face went pale. The court officially recognized me as the sole trustee with full control over the company, all assets, and the lake house, exactly as Dad had intended. Monica had no claim, no leverage, and no legal recourse left. Outside the courthouse, Ethan punched the air. "We did it!" he shouted, grinning from ear to ear. Sophia hugged me, a mix of relief and pride on her face. Aunt Margaret gave a quiet, satisfied smile. Monica's defeat wasn't just legal, it was personal. She had believed she could manipulate, intimidate, and take everything without earning it. But Dad had planned for someone who would act with integrity, patience, and intelligence. The next weeks were filled with celebration and hard work. The company grew faster than ever, with new contracts, improved systems, and a loyal team that believed in our vision. The lake house became a retreat not just for weekends, but for strategic planning and family bonding. Each room, each corner carried memories of Dad, and now they carried the promise of the future we were building. One quiet evening, sitting by the lake with Ethan and and Sophia, I reflected on everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, Ethan said quietly, tossing a small pebble into the water. But I get it now. Dad's trust wasn't just about money or property. It was about teaching us responsibility, strategy, and patience. Sophia nodded. And family, that's what really mattered. We didn't just win the company, we stayed united. Aunt Margaret joined us, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Your father's dream is safe because of all of you. And Monica's schemes, they only made you stronger. I looked out over the lake, the sunset painting the water gold, and whispered softly, we did it, not just for the business, for everything you believe in. For the first time, I truly felt it. The weight of responsibility balanced perfectly with the satisfaction of fulfillment. Dad's legacy wasn't just preserved, it was flourishing in the hands of the family he trusted most. And as the gentle waves lapped against the dock, I smiled. Not from victory over Monica, but because of the life, love, and legacy we had preserved together. The months after Monica's defeat were calmer, almost eerily so. For the first time since Dad's passing, there were no court summons, no lawyers' letters, no sudden outbursts. It felt as if a storm had finally passed, leaving behind a quiet but steady sunlight. The company thrived in ways none of us could have predicted. Ethan had expanded the logistics division and even organized a public showcase of Dad's vintage cars, drawing collectors from across the country. Sophia launched a national campaign that doubled our client base in less than 6 months. I focused on strategy and expansion, negotiating partnerships that Dad had once dreamed of but never had the time to secure. One evening, sitting at a long oak table in the lake house dining room, I looked around at my siblings and Aunt Margaret. The table was covered in papers, contracts, marketing designs, schedules, but the laughter, the easy camaraderie, it reminded me of family dinners when Dad was alive. This isn't just business anymore, Sophia said, stirring her coffee. It feels like home. Ethan nodded. Yeah, like we're actually carrying something forward instead of just surviving. But peace rarely lasts forever. One Monday morning, I arrived at the office to find a letter waiting for me, not from Monica, but from someone I hadn't thought about in years, my cousin Daniel. He had been at the will reading, silent and distant, but hadn't played any role since then. Now his letter was short and unsettling. We need to talk. There are things about the company's past you don't know. I sat back, frowning. Daniel and Dad had a bitter falling out years ago over a business deal gone wrong. Why now? Why reach out after all this time? I shared the letter with Ethan and Sophia later that day. Ethan immediately scowled. He's trouble. He always was. Don't trust him. Sophia, more cautious, tilted her head. But what if he knows something real? Dad wasn't perfect. Maybe Daniel has information that matters. I decided to meet Daniel, carefully. We arranged to meet at a quiet diner outside the city. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. His once sharp, confident demeanor was dulled, his suit a little worn, his eyes tired. He slid into the booth across from me and wasted no time. Your father and I, we built that company together, he said. Before Monica, before any of this. But something happened. He shut me out. You should know why. I listened carefully as he spoke of old contracts, silent investors, and a debt that Dad had taken on privately years ago. According to Daniel, there was one unresolved matter, something that could resurface if not handled. I didn't want to believe him at first. Dad had always been meticulous, deliberate, but the way Daniel spoke, the details he knew, it was hard to dismiss entirely. When I returned to the lake house that evening, Ethan was furious. He's manipulating you. He wants money, that's all. Sophia, though, was thoughtful. Even if he is, shouldn't we check? If there's even a chance he's telling the truth, ignoring it could backfire. Aunt Margaret listened quietly, then spoke with a gravity that silenced us. Your father wasn't perfect. He carried burdens he never wanted you children to bear. If Daniel has knowledge of something hidden, maybe it's time you faced it. The days that followed were filled with digging. Old files, archived contracts, conversations with Dad's former associates. Slowly, a pattern emerged. There was indeed an unresolved financial tie from decades ago, something Dad had quietly managed alone. It wasn't catastrophic, but if ignored, it could damage the company's reputation. And that's when I realized Dad hadn't left me just the business. He had left me the responsibility to face even the unfinished battles he never resolved. So I made a decision. Instead of hiding it or denying it, I would confront it directly, transparently, and responsibly. At the next company-wide meeting, I addressed our employees. This company was built on honesty and resilience. There are things from the past we must face, but I promise you this. We will face them together, and we will come out stronger. The room erupted in applause, not because of the problem, but because of the truth. People believed in us because we weren't just chasing success. We were standing for integrity. Later that night, back at the lake house, I sat on the dock staring out over the still water. The burden was heavy, yes, Yes, but it was real. And for the first time, I understood the full weight of Dad's trust. He hadn't just chosen me to inherit his company, he had chosen me to inherit his unfinished battles, his dreams, his burdens, and his legacy. As the moon rose, I whispered into the night, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll finish what you started, no matter how hard it gets." And for the first time in months, I didn't just feel like his son, I felt like his successor. The days after Daniel's revelation were restless ones. Even as the company thrived, his words echoed in my mind. "There are things about the company's past you don't know." I wanted to dismiss him, like Ethan had. But the truth was, the fragments of information I'd uncovered, old documents tucked in forgotten drawers, scattered notes in Dad's handwriting, hinted that Daniel wasn't entirely lying. One evening, I invited Daniel to the lake house. Ethan hated the idea, but Sophia convinced him to at least hear Daniel out. "We can't keep pretending ghosts don't exist," she said. "If there's something to uncover, better it come from us than from outsiders." Daniel arrived quietly, dressed in a plain jacket. He looked older than his years, worn down by battles of his own. He sat across from us at the heavy wooden table, his eyes scanning the room like he was stepping into a memory. "This house," he said softly. "Your father and I spent nights here drafting business plans when you kids were just toddlers. This place is where it all began." Ethan crossed his arms. "Spare us the nostalgia. What do you want?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't snap. "I want to set the record straight," he said. "When your dad and I started the company, we took on silent investors. One of them backed out halfway, leaving us dead. Edward decided to shoulder it alone instead of dragging the family through it. He kept paying it off, little by little, but he didn't finish before he died." I frowned. "How much are we talking about?" Daniel hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. Inside were contracts, payment records, and names I didn't recognize. The amount wasn't ruinous, but it was significant enough to hurt us. It came to light. Sophia leaned over the paper, her eyes narrowing. "If this is true, why didn't Dad ever tell us?" Daniel sighed. "Because Edward protected his children. Always. He carried burdens so you wouldn't have to. But now those burdens are yours." The room fell into silence. Ethan shook his head, furious. "Convenient. You show up after all these years with paperwork, claiming to be some noble truth teller. You're after something. Admit it." Daniel didn't flinch. "I'm after redemption. I walked away once, and I regretted it every day." Aunt Margaret, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Her voice calm, but "Daniel, what you say is true. Then you owe the family more than words. You owe us action. Help fix what's broken. That's the only way your redemption means anything." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then let me help." For the next several weeks, the lake house became a war room. Daniel sat with us, laying out the history of old contracts, tracing names, and making calls people Dad once. Ethan remained cold toward him, refusing to believe Daniel's motives were pure, while Sophia leaned toward cautious optimism. I found myself in the middle, torn between vision and the recognition that Daniel's knowledge valued. Dad had always taught me to measure people not by their words, but by their acts, and Daniel, for the first time, seemed determined to act. But just as we began together, that old eye, another problem. One of the former investors, the son of a man who had backed out a decade ago, showed interest in during trouble. He contacted press, threatening to expose financial skeleton. It was Monica all over again. Only this time, the attack wasn't about greed. It was about legacy. I met with a man in his office, the city skyline gleaming out by the window. He leaned back in his chair, smirked. "Your father was a great man, but he left unfinished business. I could bury that, or I'd bring it to light. Depends on how much worth you." It was blackmail, plain and simple. For a moment, I thought of Dad, how he had carried burdens alone, how he had chosen silence instead of dragging others into the storm. But I wasn't Dad. I wouldn't play by the same rules. I stood, my voice calm. "If you think threats will work, you don't know who you're dealing with. We don't bury truths in this family. We face them. And when the press hears the truth from us, not from you, your leverage vanishes." His smirk faltered. Walking out of that office, I felt a surge of clarity. Dad had chosen me not just to inherit, but to decide differently, to be stronger where he had chosen silence. That night at the lake house, I told everyone what had happened. Ethan actually laughed, shaking his head. "That's exactly what Dad would have wanted. Honesty. Straight to the point." Sophia smiled, her eyes shining. "You didn't just protect the company. You protected Dad's name." Daniel looked at me, something unspoken passing in his eyes. Respect, maybe even pride. "Edward chose well," he said quietly. And as I sat there, surrounded by the family, old and new, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about finishing Dad's work. It was about rewriting the story together with every challenge we faced. The lake shimmered under the moonlight that night, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in Dad's shadow. I felt like I was walking beside him, carrying the legacy forward. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments what country you are watching from.